Well, welcome back to the Azure podcast. This is episode number 471, being recorded on the 30th of August, 2023, with special guest Steve Selleny. I'm Sujit, and on Teams with me, we have Russell, Kale, and of course, our special guest, Steve, who we're going to get to in just a minute on a very hot topic these days. But before we get there, let's just talk about some of the news in the Azure space. And I see a few items that we've put together. Kale, do you have one to get us started?
Yeah, sure. The first one I have here is about distributed denial of service attacks, so DDoS. You may have heard about in the media before. And this is basically a lot of work that we've been doing around simulation testing for Azure for these DDoS attacks. So essentially what this is we have this thing called Azure DDoS protection, which is this solution offered in Azure to basically protect applications and things, your resources and whatnot inside of there from these type of attacks. And there's essentially these, you can build these plans in your Azure subscription in order to provide these kind of features. Along with that, we have simulation partners who are working with us on this to do that. Now, obviously, there's a lot of controls around this kind of stuff, right? When you set these kind of things up, they can only work inside of Azure and inside of your tenant that you're using, so that you're not affecting others or actually launching offensive attacks against the internet or whatnot. So it's a very kind of controlled environment, but it gives you a way to basically be able to simulate these kind of DDoS things and provide some protection, gap analysis, all these kind of things that you're looking for to harden your applications against the public internet and these types of attacks that are happening. There's a great article on this. I'll go ahead and we'll put it in the link notes, and basically it walks you through step by step of how to create these protection plans, how to run these simulations and whatnot inside Azure, which is really cool.
Indeed, very cool. Yeah. So I have a few in there, so I'll run through them. And the first one is on our Windows application firewall. Now there is the new feature where we can do rate limiting. Right? So if you can set it up so if there's certain clients that are maybe sending you too many requests, you can kind of give them a rate limit. Of course, what that means is it'll prevent it's kind of what Kale was talking about, the denial of service attacks to help mitigate that. Essentially, it'll slow down that particular client, right? It's not going to just turn it off, but just make sure that not one client is overwhelming the entire system. A second one is Terraform has been something that's become very popular these days, and on the other side of it, we've got a feature in which we have to talk about at some point, which is, Cosmos DB has all these cool front ends now that they support to kind of mimic different databases. And one of them is the PostgreSQL database. We talked about last week about how PostgreSQL database now has that flex kind of environment where you can grow, the database size can grow dynamically. So there's a lot of features that are being added to the actual PostgreSQL. But if you just care about Postgres as a protocol, you could use Cosmos DB as a backend and have a PostgreSQL front end to it. So you get all the reliability of a Cosmos DB database. In that, so now there is a Terraform support for that configuration. So if you want to deploy a Cosmos DB database with a PostgreSQL front end, you can do that through Terraform and do all the manipulation that Terraform offers to you. The infrastructure as code. Similar to that, or at least part of the same service now. There's also AAD authentication available too. So if you need to authenticate to a PostgreSQL front end running with a Cosmos DB backend, you can do that with AAD now. You don't have to use the connection strings that we typically use in the past. And then a couple more updates here on Azure Functions. Durable functions is something that a lot of developers like. It's a nice architectural pattern, offers a very consistent way of having your functions running reliably all the time. And Python was not supported as a language in durable functions. It used to be like, I think, .NET and a few others. I think JavaScript was also there. Now Python is supported. We all know Python's becoming very popular, especially with OpenAI. And so I'm glad they've added that with durable functions as well. So I'm sure a lot of people who are building OpenAI applications will find this useful. And finally, Azure Redis. One of the most frustrating things as a app developer is when you have a Redis backend if there's a latency or a delay in your application, you don't really know if it's because of Redis, right? You expect Redis to typically come back very quickly, but if you're doing some sort of query on Redis, sometimes it can take some amount of time. And so now they've added a new metric to Azure Redis, where it can tell you the 99th percentile, what was the latency. So you can go and say, okay, what is the worst case latency that I experienced over this period of time, and then kind of correlate that to some queries that you may have made from your application. Can it allow you to troubleshoot that a little quickly? Russell, what do you got?
Yeah, so this isn't a new sexy feature, unfortunately, and I seem to keep picking these things out when they go end of life. But yeah, as the ASEs, App Service Environments, we're on version 3 of it now, which was announced, I think, July 21, thereabouts. Version 3 has been out quite a while. Version 1 and 2 are end of lifing in the end of August next year. So plenty of time to do something about this. But it's just a reminder, really, and it was posted on the Azure blog site about this. By moving to version 3, you do get some new features. You get some cost savings because there's no stamp cost as part of that cluster. You get improved performance, better scaling, better security and resilience. We've got some free automated migration tooling available. There's a pre-flight check, there's some live learning sessions, and the ability to engage fast track for those larger projects as well. Yeah, and for those that aren't aware, app service environments, it's this kind of isolated and dedicated environment for running apps securely at high scale. Confusingly, only available through the app service plans version 2. But it will be ASE v3 when you provision them. So if you're on those, and I've been having conversations with my customers about planning to migrate and what have you, do make sure you get it done, or at least you've got a plan to get it done.
Yeah, and it does remind me of one more retirement which we should tell our customers about, which is cloud services, right? So this is the very first PaaS service on Azure back in the day, right? Which started it all when it was still called Red Dog, I think. So that particular deployment model, cloud services, is definitely being retired. There is an extended support model that you can migrate to temporarily, which is available. So within the next year, starting from this week until exactly 1 year from now, you should be looking at moving your cloud services to that extended support model. Okay,
but those were available before VMs, weren't they? So it was
that was the very first system. Yeah. Because Azure was kind of took a different path from when it came to the cloud. They started with PaaS services, then went to VMs. Most of the cloud service providers did it the other way. And I know a few customers that have been using that. I've actually done a lot of work with them over the years.
We should do a reminiscence episode at some point and go back a few years. And
does that mean that that's the end of non-ARM deployments then, Sajid? Does that also mean that, or no? I don't know.
Yeah. So once this is gone, I mean, when it goes to the extended support, they kind of came up with they were working at least on a V2 of cloud services to kind of modernize it slightly. So maybe that's going to allow them to do cloud services through ARM. I don't remember the exact details on that. But yeah, for the original cloud services, that was the ASM model, I think.
And that is service management. Yeah.
And that's definitely going to be.
ASM was the thing that's
Yep. Cool.
Great. Well, that's a good roundup on the news. So I think it's time to get Steve here. Hey, Steve, thanks so much for joining us today. Please give our listeners some information about your background, what you do at Microsoft, what your passion is, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So I'm what we call a partner development manager. So I work within our global partner solutions group on the global financial services ISV team. So I look after the go-to-market relationship between Microsoft and a handful of our global software companies that work in the FSI industry. I've been doing that for 2.5 years. I've been at Microsoft for 10. I used to be more technical. I used to be on an account team as a technology strategist, and I sold to some of our enterprise accounts.
So yeah, and you and I have worked recently on some of those FSI ISV partners, and that's how I got to know you. But one of the things that we've seen and you've seen as well is uh, a lot of our FSI customers are looking at getting onto the AI and OpenAI and ML bandwagon. Right. I mean, I think they've been trying it for a long time, but now we've provided all the tools and technologies to make it easier. So, I was one of the questions that we were wondering is like, what are some of the use cases, right, that we're seeing with our customers, so we can, start with that and then maybe dive into, what are some of the difficulties in adopting these technologies that they may be facing that we should be considering as we come up with solutions for them.
Yeah, thanks, Sujit. Yeah, Copilot's everywhere, right? Is that's probably the number one trend. But when you think about what generative AI is good at, I think that's the kind of the logical step, as you start to think about what the use cases are, and content creation probably being number one, where the term generative comes from, but also being able to reason over large volumes of data, what you might call that knowledge mining, summarization, sort of next level chatbots. I think these are the big buckets that partners are thinking about. There's certainly things that generative is not good at. If you think about numerical calculations and maybe things that are very highly sensitive from a regulatory standpoint, maybe aren't great use cases to start with. But there are a lot of good ideas that are falling out of this, and I do also like that the introduction and really all the attention that generative is getting is awakening kind of this dormant line of thinking in our partners and probably in our customers as well, in terms of what you can do just with AI broadly. Uh, they may have ideas. I've seen this quite a bit actually, where a partner will then come with an idea for generative AI in quotes, and you look at the use case and you go, well, that's just machine learning, right? That's something that we've been able to do. Maybe it's cognitive or something, right? That's something that we've been able to do for the past several years. But it wasn't always top of mind because there wasn't the kind of the this stage of attention that AI is getting now. So it is resurrecting some things that they're very, very real and have been real, but can be done now. And partners really have to, when you're a software company, much like we are, the technologists in all of us gravitate quickly to what the possibilities are. Like, this is super cool. What can I do with it? What can I automate? How can I make this process faster or better? How can I improve my user experience? But you also have to balance that with what's commercially viable as a software company. Of anything that I build is going to incur costs. I have to pay my developers. I have to pay for the services. I have to know if that's going to result in revenue down the road for me. So that is, that's a very delicate balance I think our partners have to figure out.
And if you were to think about what are some of the the low-hanging fruit or the big rocks that these partners are trying to solve for. I mean, obviously all the partners have insurance, capital markets, banking, customers, right? So looking at a broad swath of FSI use cases, like, are there any big rocks that all of them are thinking about, right? Like, this is like the most popular thing that all of them are asking for.
Yeah, I think there's a very easy one around the code side of this, which anybody who looks at GitHub Copilot, it's very easy to see how that, number one, that makes your own developers more productive, but also very easy to then draw, extrapolate into whatever kind of modeling tools our partners might have, where they have proprietary languages that they've developed. This is very common in financial modeling, risk modeling, et cetera, of, okay, now I can actually point these models to my own code base and now help my customers develop code using our proprietary language, and make them that much more productive, and maybe even open up the tooling to people who are a little bit less skilled from a development standpoint. So that's a from a low-hanging fruit standpoint, that's very easy.
That's very
do
interesting. I never thought
Mhm.
about that. So this is using the codex I guess the codex model or whatever we call it, right? You're saying that instead of just looking at all the open source repositories out there, you can say, okay, here's my internal GitHub or whatever source control system, and index that or use that as a reference. Is that how it works?
Yeah, these won't be publicly, there's no open source for, some of these proprietary languages, and you have to take a look at, is this something that you can do with just, very creative prompt engineering and few shot learning, things like that, or do you have to look at fine tuning? That's how do you actually train the model to understand this language and give reasonable suggestions to the developers who are using it? But yeah, it's something that we're seeing across a number of accounts.
Yeah, one thing I was wondering if you were seeing any trends around like from the data side, because if you take finance for instance, a lot of internal databases. There's obviously not just like one big one, right? They have tons of these
Mm-hmm.
databases, and rationalizing data
Mm-hmm.
across those is quite hard, right? And things like natural language can maybe help in that case,
Mm-hmm.
especially as people are joining the enterprise and being like, how could I do something? For instance, I'm thinking about like quants and these kind of guys. They know like all the internal structures and things like that around things because they're very detailed with the data. But what if there was another analyst who just said, I know high level what I want to ask, but I really don't know the exact tables? Is that something that they're kind of looking into?
It's a use case I've heard. I haven't heard it with the partners that I manage, but I have heard that from some of my peers of this using a natural language interface to then go generate a SQL query, or something like that, where that can actually go retrieve the data that the analyst or the whoever the front end user is, what they're looking for, without having to know how to pull that directly themselves. I think other ones that we're seeing that I think are pretty common are the sort of maybe jokingly said Copilot's everywhere, but that is a very valid use case. That we're seeing both there. There's an internal aspect of that. Whether a customer or a partner can fulfill, can arm their agents and consultants and knowledge workers basically with something that they have to build themselves. And you've seen some announcements publicly. I think Moody's did an announcement with us about building a Moody's GPT or something like that. That's available for them internally. Is that something they have to build, or can they maybe leverage some of our own first-party Copilot to deliver some of that capability? You're hearing that a lot in terms of how do we make our own agents and consultants more productive. But then also from a product standpoint, how do you make your products easier to use? How do you surface functionality that maybe is not used on a regular basis by your end users? And does this make, I'm trying to align it with, many of our ISVs are still in the process of transitioning from what I would call more boxed product into SaaS. And even if they've already been in SaaS, they're maybe still adopting or rolling out continuous delivery. And so their users are not accustomed to the constant changes in the UI that our users are used to, because we've been doing this for such a long time. So having a Copilot there that can actually help with that instructional UI and give the user some real meaningful instruction suggestions about how to use the tool more intelligently, I think is really interesting for a lot of our partners.
That's an interesting thing about the challenges of adopting OpenAI in an ISV product, right? Because now you have to there's this new service that they have to kind of add on, and I know we've had challenges even with customers trying to get access to OpenAI, right? You have to get on the waiting list sometimes and things like that. So I'm just wondering, like, that must be even more confusing or problematic for ISVs, right? Trying to include like OpenAI as part of the solution. How does that work? Do they, I guess if it's a SaaS solution, is it just one of the services that the customer has to get pre-authorized for? Because that could cause problems when they try to deploy these solutions in customer tenants.
Yeah, I don't know if we've gotten, at least with my partners, we might not have gotten far enough to know exactly what they'll do from both from a commercialization standpoint as well as how will they manage the demands of the infrastructure, not knowing exactly how it will be used, at least coming out of the gate, and then how many customers will buy it. If it's an additional SKU, let's say for an existing product that you have to upsell your customer to, how do you forecast that demand and then in turn forecast that demand back to Microsoft? Like, I think that's going to be challenging for our partners to do, but with the provision throughput units that we have available, I think we're giving our partners confidence that they can have access to the resources they need to deliver to the customers. But it's really on them to decide how are we going to sell this? Are we selling? Is it a module? Is it an add-on SKU? Is it a new product? Like how actually do we package this and then take that to market?
You mentioned Moody's as one of them, and that's something that I have heard of as well. They're a big use case in OpenAI. What are some of the other well-known use cases that exist in FSI that maybe the ISVs are going to start thinking about that? Oh, maybe that's something we should put in the product, right? I can see so many customers are asking for it. Other use cases that you may be familiar with?
Yeah, there's one that's more internal that we didn't talk about, which was there's a lot of contact center use cases that are. This isn't an FSI specific thing. I think you'd find this in just about any industry. But we've been able to do speech to text, maybe entity extraction from call logs for a long time. But actually analyzing the logs for what are the three most important things. This could be a 10-15 minute discussion. How do you summarize it? What are the 3 or 5 most important things that were discussed? What was the sentiment of the customer? What was the resolution? Right? How do you actually pull that kind of content out of free-form text? Something that we can do, and imagine doing that in as close to real time potentially as you could get to be able to really improve your contact center experience. I think that applies to any industry. Financial services is looking at things like fraud detection. We've been able to do fraud with traditional machine learning techniques, but a lot of that looks at what you call it, the metadata or the structured data around things like claims and insurance. But now you can actually look at the contents of those claims and draw patterns across potentially things that you were not able to see at scale before. And then content generation, I think, is really interesting. Capital markets, things like pitch book generation, writing. Whether it's it's not like you would not automate the writing of a policy for insurance, but you could automate a starter version of that. From in a Copilot perspective to allow you to take 90%, get a 90% complete document and then fill the rest of it with a human. How do you actually take these things that are fairly kind of rote, repetitive work and use AI to deliver those?
Yeah, that is one thing that did come to mind. I was going to ask you, in AI, we all know this. We're not supposed to take whatever is given to us and apply it blindly, right? Everything's supposed to have like a human review attached to it. And how I'm just wondering, when ISVs are kind of incorporating this, does that mean like there's additional work they have to do to create like review panels or or screens or whatever in everything? Because you can't really just take something and maybe apply it to a customer blindly, right? There has to be a review step. So how are they adapting to that model, which is going to be different from what they're probably used to in the past?
Yeah, and it's a very conservative industry, as I think from working with some of our customers and partners. There is an extensive review that I think is going on in pretty much all these organizations from a legal standpoint as to where does the liability sit in some of these scenarios, and how is that risk mitigated? I suspect that in a lot of scenarios, software companies will do what they can to pass that on to their customers. And that there'll be disclaimers or language that says that the content generated is not to be considered 100% accurate or complete. You see this guidance if you do search in Bing, right? So there's a disclaimer. This is not 100% accurate, right? You need to validate that these things are the way that you need them to be. So they'll put in the appropriate guide rails to make sure that they're not exposing a level of risk that is not tolerable for their business, and that the customers are advised appropriately of, if you're going to use this capability, you need to put the right checks and balances in place to make sure that what goes to then your customer is something that you can have the faith that it's fully accurate and keeps your business safe.
Yeah, I was interested too. Also, if you saw any signals around like messaging. I know, like at the old conference, we showed some like Copilots. You were talking about Copilots earlier. We showed some of those in Teams, for instance, where Teams can be powered by these Copilots, and you can basically ask Teams questions, and you kind of like that agent model where it's answering questions for you, but it's like consulting other things, maybe other Copilots, maybe backend databases, whatever. So I was just interested if you're seeing any signal on that side too for these kind of internal applications at these companies for like messaging, I guess it would be, or comms, type things.
Yeah. I mean, I suspect, I don't know the Moody's story, or I think AXA just also issued a press release about something similar. I don't know those stories in detail, but I assume that's how they're working. Is that they're building these chat interfaces that not just draw from publicly available information like Bing would, but also internal data sources and knowledge bases and things like that to aggregate knowledge across the company. Really improving kind of a historical problem that this industry's had for 30 years, which is in enterprise search. Right? How do you find all this data and information that is locked up within the organization, and using these natural language queries to access that, whether that's structured or unstructured, is really powerful. My partners that I manage directly, I don't think have gotten as far as those two organizations, but I could see that being applicable, really to all of them.
I thought SharePoint was supposed to solve all this, but
SharePoint Copilot.
There we go.
Copilot,
And,
SharePoint. Yeah, there's so much to think about here, and all this guidance and everything that you're talking about, Steve. And I think it looks to me like what's needed is a framework for like a center of excellence, or like we've got the guidance for well-architected framework, for example. You want some principles and some, like a checklist for people to follow to be able to implement things, so to make sure that they're doing things using AI responsibly, going across our fairness pillar and reliability and safety and all the rest of it. So are you seeing partners kind of actively or proactively adopting that, or is it something that they're kind of discovering through their journey, and then you're having to kind of point out to them, actually, you might need a center of excellence around how you adopt AI, and this is the approach we recommend?
Yeah, it appears to me to be very cultural across the partners. Is it one of the ones I work with closely, as they certainly have a penchant for forming committees or COEs or whatever you might want to call them, and they've already done that around generative AI. And what I think you have to caution those groups in is to be an enabler and not an inhibitor of, okay, let's not slow everything down. Let's give people these frameworks and these best practices to then go accelerate what it is they're trying to do, and to not hold them back. I think there are also services partners out there that are probably putting together their own kind of COE in a box type of offerings that they can take to customers to help them kind of instrument that and guide them along their journey. But it seems like it's happening differently to everybody, based on corporate culture and how they think about where they ride the wave of innovation. Are they earlier? Do they like to see things play out and then try and do more of a fast follow? I think that varies widely.
And I guess the other thing is, when they implement and leverage this level of generative AI in the back, or any AI, in fact, are they being transparent and coming forward and saying to the customers, actually, we're using AI here? I know that you've got the disclaimers around hallucinations and errors may be inherent in this, but are they being forthright and saying, we are using OpenAI, this is how we use it? Or is that kind of considered a bit proprietary information that they don't want to give away?
I think they would probably lean toward disclosure. I don't know that with 100% confidence, but at least in this industry, I used to approach things maybe naively of saying, well, if something's SaaS, why do you care about how it's built? But it certainly seems like in this industry, people care very much about how it's built, even if it's being offered as a service. So a lot of these ISVs, I believe, are accustomed to sharing with their customers, this is how we're doing it. This is what we've built and how it works. And AI would be the same as what they've been doing.
And I think that's becoming more of the norm generally, because customers are more choosy about, what's the sustainability credentials of this software or the company that I'm investing in to do X, Y, and Z as well. So yeah, that's good to hear. It's a good step forward, I think.
How serious are the partners taking this new technology? Because there's this whole is it a hype cycle or whatever, right? I mean, everyone's into AI now. Are customers going after this tooth and nail, or are they treading cautiously, waiting to see what the kind of market is? I'm talking about the ISV especially.
Yeah, based on what I see, I think at an executive level, I think every executive would tell you they're taking it seriously. They certainly would tell their customers that they want to look like they are forward thinking and they're at the vanguard of technology. The reality probably is that it's a very mixed bag, and some are moving quickly, some are being exceptionally cautious around how they're approaching this, and you want to get the use cases right. And I certainly don't discredit the idea of let's not just go rush to build something because we can. We need to think about whether it's the right use case, what's the risk profile, how do we monetize this, all of that stuff. But I think they have to take it seriously, whether it's because they look at it from an innovation standpoint or they look at it from a defensive position of if we don't have this and our competitors do, we're going to lose business.
Right, but you're right. It has to have something. It has to be something that makes sense for the product that they're offering, right? I mean, if OpenAI doesn't fit in that model, then there's no point trying to just shove it in there. So, yeah, I think it's a good idea to start with a good, solid use case. This is amazing. Yeah, thanks so much, Steve, for sharing all the insights into this. It's been really enlightening. Any more questions for Steve, guys? All right.
I'm good here.
Steve,
thanks, Steve.
If you have any resources you want to share, if you think you have a list of these use cases that are public or anything that you feel you want to share with our listeners, you can send them over to me and I can attach them along with the podcast recording for this show.
Sure. All right. Sounds good.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.